Chris Palmer stood in the docking bay of Station Epsilon 7 and watched as dozens of alien species moved around him with purpose and precision that spoke of military training. The Galactic Defense Academy had been operating for over 200 years and had trained elite soldiers from every corner of known space. Yet Chris was the first human to ever walk through its doors. The station itself was massive. A gleaming structure of silver and blue metals that rotated slowly in the darkness of space. And through the large viewport windows, Chris could see dozens of ships coming and going, while trainees in various uniforms marched in formation across the visible decks. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 18 months ago, after finally developing faster-than-light travel that met the minimum technology requirements. And the Council had been cautious about integrating humanity into their military systems. Chris adjusted his duffel bag on his shoulder and made his way toward the registration desk where a tall crystalline being was processing arrivals. The being's name tag identified it as Administrator Quilks Anid. Regarded Chris with what might have been curiosity, though it was hard to tell with a species whose face was made of shifting geometric patterns. Name and homeworld, Quilks said, its voice chiming like glass bells. Chris Palmer. Earth. He responded clearly. Quilks's patterns shifted into what Chris assumed was surprise, and the administrator checked its datapad twice before looking back at him. You are the human trainee. We were told to expect you, though many of the instructors believed it was an administrative error. Why would they think that? Chris asked. Keeping his tone polite and neutral, Earth is classified as a Class 9 death world in our database, Quilks explained while processing Chris's credentials. And most species assume this classification is a mistake because beings from such worlds rarely develop advanced civilization. And those that do typically lack the physical constitution for military service. Chris nodded slowly, understanding the prejudice he was walking into. Earth's high gravity, aggressive wildlife, extreme weather patterns, and oxygen-rich atmosphere made it one of the more hostile planets in the known galaxy. Yet humans had not only survived, but thrived there for hundreds of thousands of years. I assure you. I'm ready for the training, Chris said with a slight smile. Quilks handed him a datapad with his barracks assignment and schedule. You are in Barracks 7, Section D, and your bunkmates are already there, so you should introduce yourself quickly because orientation begins in 2 hours. Chris thanked the administrator and followed the directional signs through the station's corridors, passing groups of alien trainees who stopped their conversations to stare at him. He heard whispers in various languages, some translated by his earpiece and others remaining incomprehensible. But the tone was universally skeptical when he reached Barracks 7. Section D. He found 3 aliens already unpacking their gear. The first was a tall, muscular creature with blue-gray skin and 4 arms that Chris recognized as a Dravanian from the orientation materials he had studied on the journey here. The second was a smaller being covered in sleek purple fur with large golden eyes that marked it as a Pelthian. And the third was something Chris had never seen before, with segmented armor plating and multiple sensor stalks. The 4-armed Dravanian looked up first, and its eyes narrowed. A human. They actually sent a human to the academy. I'm Chris Palmer, he said, extending his hand in the traditional human greeting before remembering that many species didn't share this custom. The Pelthian approached with interest. Its ears perked forward. I am Zara, and this is Court. It gestured to the Dravanian. And that is Brooks from the Sector 9 colonies. Pleased to meet you all, Chris said, while moving to the only unclaimed bunk cord, crossed all 4 arms, and leaned against the wall. How did a human even make it here? Your species only just discovered faster-than-light travel, and your planet is supposedly a death world, though you look pretty fragile to me. Chris began unpacking his gear, carefully placing his belongings in the storage locker. Earth is my home, and yes, it's classified as a Class 9 death world, though we managed just fine there. Managed just fine. Court laughed, a deep rumbling sound. The atmospheric composition alone should have killed your species in its cradle, and the gravity is nearly double what most civilized worlds maintain. How do soft-skinned creatures like you survive that? Zara moved closer to Chris with genuine curiosity. I read about Earth in the database, and it said your world has extreme weather patterns and dangerous predators everywhere. Is that true? It's true, Chris confirmed while organizing his uniforms. We have storms that can level entire cities, predators that hunt in packs, and plants that produce toxins strong enough to kill most creatures that touch them. Brooks's sensor stalk swiveled toward Chris. And yet you survived. Now Chris shrugged, a gesture that seemed to confuse his bunkmates. Humans are adaptable, and we've learned to work with our environment instead of against it. We build structures that can withstand the storms. We developed weapons and strategies to deal with predators. And we learned which plants to avoid and which ones we could use for medicine or food. Court snorted dismissively. That all sounds impressive until you face real military challenges, and I give you 1 week before you wash out of this program. The Academy doesn't care about your survival stories from home. They care about whether you can handle combat situations against actual threats. Before Chris could respond, a loud chime echoed through the barracks, and a voice announced that all new trainees should report to the main auditorium for orientation. The 4 bunkmates grabbed their datapads and headed out into the corridor where streams of diverse alien species were all moving in the same direction. The auditorium was enormous with seating arranged in a circular pattern around a central platform where several instructors stood waiting. Chris found a seat between Zara and another trainee who appeared to be made entirely of crystallized minerals. And he watched as hundreds of beings filled the space with a cacophony of different languages and communication methods. A tall figure stepped onto the central platform and the room fell silent immediately. The being was clearly a Krillian with its distinctive ridged skull and powerful build. And its uniform displayed numerous medals and rank insignia that spoke of extensive combat experience. I am Instructor Vexter, and I have trained soldiers from 60 different species. Over my 30 years at this academy, the Krillian's voice boomed through the auditorium, without need for amplification. You are here because your governments believe you have potential to become elite warriors who can defend your worlds and maintain peace throughout the galaxy. Vexter began pacing around the platform, his eyes scanning the assembled trainees. However, potential means nothing without discipline, training, and the physical capability to survive in the harshest conditions that warfare demands. Over the next 6 months, you will be tested in every way possible, and many of you will fail. The instructor stopped and gestured to a holographic display that showed various hostile environments. You will learn to fight in zero gravity. You will learn to survive in toxic atmospheres. You will learn to operate when wounded and exhausted and separated from your units. Only the strongest will earn the right to graduate from this academy. Chris listened intently while noting the specific challenges mentioned. Toxic atmospheres, extreme environments, survival situations. These were all things humans dealt with regularly on Earth, though perhaps not in the same context as military operations. Tomorrow morning at 0600 hours, you will begin your first evaluation, Vexter continued. This evaluation will test your resistance to biological hazards and toxins commonly used in modern warfare. Those who show natural resistance will be considered for advanced training, while those who prove vulnerable will receive additional protective equipment instruction. Court leaned over and whispered loudly enough for Chris to hear. This is where the soft species get separated from the real soldiers, and I'm betting the human needs full isolation gear. Chris said nothing but made a mental note of the challenge ahead. The morning alarm sounded at 0530 hours, and Chris was already awake, dressed in his training uniform and ready to go, while his bunkmates were still pulling themselves from their sleep cycles. Zara yawned widely, showing rows of small pointed teeth, while Court grumbled something in his native language that the translator didn't bother converting. And Brooks's sensor stalks drooped with obvious fatigue. "How are you already ready?" Zara asked while stumbling toward the washing station. "I'm used to early mornings," Chris replied simply. On Earth, he had worked on his family's farm before joining the military, and 0530 was considered sleeping in compared to the 0400 wake-up calls he had grown accustomed to during his years of service. They made their way to the training complex along with dozens of other bleary-eyed trainees, and the atmosphere was tense with anticipation about the upcoming evaluation. Chris had spent part of the previous evening reading through the Academy's database about common battlefield toxins, and what he found had been both interesting and oddly familiar. The environmental hazard training dome was an impressive structure that could simulate dozens of different hostile environments. And as the trainees filed in, they found themselves in a large staging area surrounded by equipment lockers and medical stations. Instructor Vexter stood at the front along with several assistants in full protective gear. "Welcome to your first real test," Vexter announced, his voice echoing through the dome. Warfare in the modern galaxy often involves biological and chemical weapons that can incapacitate or kill soldiers within minutes. Your ability to resist these hazards, or properly use protective equipment, can mean the difference between completing your mission and becoming a casualty. Holographic displays activated around the room showing molecular structures and medical data. Today you will be exposed to Xandar 9, a toxin commonly deployed by several hostile factions in contested territories. This substance causes rapid respiratory distress, cellular breakdown, and organ failure in most carbon-based life forms within 3 to 5 minutes of exposure. A collective murmur ran through the assembled trainees, and Chris saw several species physically recoil from the information being presented. The molecular structure displayed on the screens showed a complex organic compound with multiple reactive sites, and Chris studied it with growing interest. Xandar 9 works by bonding with cellular membranes and disrupting normal metabolic processes, Vexter continued. Species with certain biochemical resistances can tolerate brief exposures, but most require full environmental protection when operating in contaminated zones. One of the assistants brought out a large container filled with a greenish mist and placed it carefully on a platform. "We will divide you into groups based on your species' known resistance levels, and each group will enter the exposure chamber for measured durations. Your vital signs will be monitored continuously, and anyone showing signs of distress will be extracted immediately." The instructors began calling out species names and directing trainees into different groups. The Dravanians and several other heavily built species were placed in the high-resistance group. The Pelthians and similar mid-sized species went into the moderate resistance group, and smaller and more delicate-appearing species were assigned to the low resistance category. When Vexter got to Chris's name, he paused and checked his datapad twice. "Palmer, you're human, correct?" "Yes, sir," Chris responded. "According to our database, humans require full environmental isolation for exposure to Xandar 9, Vexter said while gesturing to the extreme vulnerability group. "Your species' biochemistry is classified as primitive and highly susceptible to most standard military-grade toxins." Chris joined the extreme vulnerability group, along with 3 other species that looked even more fragile than humans appeared. Court caught his eye from across the room and made an exaggerated gesture of someone choking. Clearly mocking what he expected to happen, Zara moved closer to Chris with concern evident in her large golden eyes. "Will you be okay?" The extreme vulnerability group usually needs the most protection. I'll be fine, Chris assured her, though he kept his expression neutral. He had noticed something about the Xander 9 molecular structure that the instructors hadn't mentioned, and he was curious to see if his suspicion was correct. The testing began with the high-resistance group entering the chamber first. The Dravenians and their fellow hardy species wore only basic breathing apparatus and spent 5 full minutes in the toxic atmosphere while their vital signs remained stable. Cord emerged looking smug and flexed all 4 arms as if he had accomplished something remarkable. The moderate resistance group went next with more extensive protective gear and shorter exposure times. And Zara came out looking a bit shaken but otherwise unharmed. The low-resistance group required full environmental suits and could only manage 30 seconds before showing signs of cellular stress. Finally, it was time for the extreme vulnerability group, and the instructors began suiting Chris up in what looked like a complete isolation system with triple-filtered breathing apparatus, full body coverage, and separate air supply. The other trainees in his group received similar equipment, though theirs was calibrated for their specific physiologies. This is standard protocol for species that lack natural resistance, one assistant explained, while checking Chris's suit seals. The chamber exposure will be brief, no more than 15 seconds, and we'll be monitoring your vitals constantly, so don't try to be heroic. Chris nodded and stepped toward the chamber entrance. Through the transparent walls, he could see the greenish mist of Xander 9 swirling in artificial air currents, and the other trainees were gathered at the observation windows to watch. Vexter stood at the control panel with his hand hovering over the emergency extraction button. Palmer, you may enter when ready, and remember that this is not a competition, so signal immediately if you feel any discomfort. Chris walked into the chamber and the door sealed behind him with a hiss of pressurizing locks. The greenish mist surrounded him, and he could hear his own breathing echoing inside the helmet of his protective suit. And for a long moment he just stood there while the instructors monitored their instruments. Then Chris did something that made every being in the observation area freeze in shock. He reached up and unlatched his helmet. Alarm klaxons immediately blared throughout the facility, and Vexter's eyes went wide with horror as he saw the human deliberately remove his protective headgear in the middle of a toxic environment. Palmer, what are you doing? Put your helmet back on immediately. But Chris didn't put the helmet back on. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate breath of the Xander 9 saturated air in his lungs, filled with the greenish mist that was supposed to cause rapid respiratory distress and cellular breakdown. The monitoring equipment showed Chris's vital signs, and they were completely normal. No elevated heart rate, no respiratory distress, no cellular damage indicators. Nothing that suggested his body was reacting to the toxin at all. Chris took another breath, and then he started laughing, a sound that echoed through the chamber's communication system and reached every stunned observer. You'd call that poison, he said between laughs. We have plants on Earth that produce worse than this. My grandmother grows them in her garden. Vexter's hand slammed down on the emergency extraction protocol, but Chris was already walking toward the exit on his own power. The chamber door opened and he stepped out into the staging area, while every eye in the dome was fixed on him with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. That's impossible, one of the medical assistants said while checking the monitoring equipment. The readings must be wrong, but the equipment wasn't wrong, and when they ran immediate medical scans on Chris, they found 0 cellular damage, 0 respiratory impact, and 0 trace of the toxin affecting his system in any way. His body had simply filtered it out as if it were nothing more than mildly unpleasant. Aircord stood with his mouth hanging open and all 4 arms had gone slack with shock. Zara's ears were flat against her head in confusion, and even the normally composed instructor, Vexter, looked like someone had just rewritten everything. He knew about biology. Chris set his helmet down on a nearby bench and looked at the molecular structure still displayed on the holographic screens. Xander 9 is basically a combination of capsaicin analogs and urushiol derivatives with some sulfur compounds mixed in, he explained calmly. On Earth, we call substances like this irritants, and they're produced by common plants that grow wild in most temperate regions. Capsaicin. Vexter repeated slowly as if the word itself was alien. What is capsaicin? It's the compound that makes peppers spicy, Chris said. Humans eat it for fun. The medical bay of station. Epsilon 7 was designed to handle injuries and ailments from dozens of different species. But Dr. Naleth had never seen anything quite like this. The Pelthian physician stood over Chris Palmer with a scanner in one hand and a datapad in the other, reviewing results that seemed to contradict everything she knew about toxicology. Your cellular structure shows no damage whatsoever, she said, while running the scanner across Chris's chest for the 5th time. The Xander 9 should have bonded with your cell membranes and begun breaking them down within seconds. But instead, your body just filtered it through your respiratory system and expelled it like normal air. Chris sat patiently on the examination table while half a dozen medical staff crowded around taking readings and collecting samples. My species evolved on a planet where toxins are everywhere, he explained. Our bodies had to develop efficient filtering systems, or we would have died out millions of years ago. Naleth's ears twitched with fascination. Explain this evolution, please. What kind of toxins does Earth have that would create this level of resistance? Well, we have plants that produce urushiol, which causes severe skin reactions in humans, but we can develop tolerance to it, Chris began. We have plants that produce capsaicin, which activates pain receptors, but doesn't actually cause tissue damage. We have nightshade plants that produce solanine and atropine. We have mushrooms that produce amatoxins. We have snakes that produce hemotoxins and neurotoxins. And we have jellyfish whose stings can stop a human heart. The medical staff exchanged glances that suggested they thought Chris might be exaggerating, but Naleth pulled up Earth's biological database, and her golden eyes went wide as she scrolled through the entries. This says Earth has over 100,000 species of toxic plants alone. And the animal kingdom includes thousands of venomous species ranging from microscopic to massive. How does any complex life survive on this world? We adapt, Chris said simply. Human children are taught from a young age which plants to avoid touching and which animals to stay away from. Our immune systems are constantly fighting off bacterial and viral infections that would be lethal to species from cleaner worlds. And our livers and kidneys process toxins as a normal daily function. One of the assistants brought up a holographic display showing the human digestive system. I'm looking at your species' metabolic processes, and this is remarkable. Your liver alone has multiple enzyme pathways dedicated to breaking down foreign compounds. And your kidneys can filter substances that would crystallize in most species' systems. That's because humans eat a lot of different things, Chris explained. We're omnivores, which means we consume both plant and animal matter. And many of the plants we eat contain mild toxins that we've learned to process. Coffee has caffeine, which is actually a natural pesticide. Chocolate has theobromine, which is toxic to many earth animals. And we ferment foods with bacteria that would be considered dangerous contaminants in most galactic food preparation. Naleth sat down heavily in a chair. You're telling me that humans regularly consume substances that other species would classify as poisons. If you want to call them poisons, then yes, Chris nodded. We also drink alcohol, which is literally a toxin that our bodies have to process. And some humans build up tolerances to it by drinking it regularly. Instructor Vexter had been standing quietly in the corner of the medical bay, listening to this exchange. And now he stepped forward with his arms crossed. "Dr. Nalith, what does this mean for Palmer's classification? If humans have this level of natural resistance, then the database entry calling them vulnerable to toxins is clearly wrong. The database entry is completely wrong," Nalith confirmed while reviewing her scans. "Based on what I'm seeing, humans should be classified as highly resistant to most organic toxins and moderately resistant to synthetic compounds. Their biochemistry is built for survival in a toxic environment." Vexter pulled out his datapad and began accessing Earth's full environmental classification. What he found there made his ridged brow furrow with concern. Earth's atmosphere is 21% oxygen, which most species would find corrosive. The gravity is listed as 1 standard G, but that's actually higher than 70% of inhabited worlds. Weather patterns include hurricanes with wind speeds over 300 kilometers per hour, tornadoes that can level entire structures, and temperature ranges from -50 to +50 degrees in different regions. That's all accurate, Chris confirmed. Earth is what we call a dynamic planet, and it's always changing. The continents move, the climate shifts, volcanoes erupt, earthquakes reshape the landscape. Humans had to become adaptable, or we would never have survived. One of the medical assistants spoke up nervously. If Earth is this dangerous, then how did humans develop civilization? Most species that evolve on harsh worlds never progress beyond simple tool, used because they're too busy surviving. Chris thought about that for a moment. I think it's because the danger forced us to cooperate. A single human can't survive alone on Earth for very long, but groups of humans working together can build shelters, hunt food, defend against predators, and pass knowledge to the next generation. We became social creatures out of necessity, and that social structure allowed us to develop technology. Nalith was typing notes rapidly. This is fascinating from an evolutionary perspective. Most species we encounter evolved on stable worlds with minimal environmental pressures, so they developed specializations for specific niches. Humans evolved with constant pressure from all directions, so they became generalists who can adapt to almost anything. Vexter moved to the viewport and looked out at the stars. When Earth applied for council membership, we reviewed their technology and determined they met the minimum requirements for faster-than-light travel. We sent observers who reported that humans seemed friendly and cooperative, and the council voted to accept them based on those observations. But nobody did a full biological assessment. Nalith finished his thought. Nobody thought it was necessary, Vexter admitted. The Class 9 Death World designation was in the database, but it was assumed to be an error, because humans don't look like they come from a death world. They're not armored. They don't have natural weapons. They're not particularly large or strong compared to many species. Chris understood what they were getting at. We don't look dangerous because we didn't evolve to fight other creatures with claws and teeth. We evolved to outsmart them, to trap them, to throw projectiles at them from a distance. Human hands are designed for tool use, and our brains are designed for problem solving, and your internal systems are designed to survive poison, Nalith added while reviewing her data. I want to run more tests if you're willing. I'd like to expose you to other common battlefield toxins and see how your body responds. I'm willing, Chris agreed. Though I should mention that humans do have limits. We can't survive everything, and there are definitely substances that can kill us. I'm not invincible. I just have better natural defenses than you expected. Over the next several hours they tested Chris's resistance to various compounds, and the results were consistent. Organic toxins that came from plants or animals barely affected him. Synthetic nerve agents caused mild discomfort but no lasting damage. Acidic compounds irritated his skin but didn't burn through it. And alkaline solutions were similar. This is going to change everything, Vexter said quietly while watching Chris undergo another test. If humans have this kind of natural resistance, then are not the vulnerable species we thought they were. They're potentially some of the most robust soldiers we could recruit. Nalith nodded in agreement. I need to contact the Galactic Medical Board and submit a full report. The classification for humans needs to be updated immediately. News of Chris's performance in the toxin chamber had already spread through the academy, and by the time he left the medical bay, there were clusters of trainees waiting in the corridors to catch a glimpse of him. Some looked at him with new respect, while others seemed nervous, as if they had just realized that the soft-looking human might be more dangerous than they thought. Zara pushed through the crowd and fell into step beside Chris. Everyone is talking about what you did. Court has been very quiet, and I think he's embarrassed about mocking you yesterday. I'm not trying to show off, Chris said honestly. I was just surprised that they called Xander 9 a deadly toxin when it's similar to stuff we deal with at home. If they had classified it as an irritant, I wouldn't have reacted the way I did. But you laughed, Zara pointed out. You stood in a cloud of poison and laughed. That's going to be remembered, Chris shrugged, that human gesture that Zara was starting to recognize. I guess I thought it was funny. They were treating it like this terrible weapon, and to me, it just smelled like a really intense garden. The emergency meeting of the Academy's senior staff convened in the command center where holographic displays showed data streaming in from multiple sources. Commandant General Thrace stood at the head of the table, his Krillian features set in an expression of deep contemplation while his instructors and department heads reviewed the reports from Chris. Palmer's medical evaluation. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Thrace said, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of military service. We classified humans as vulnerable to toxins based on incomplete data, and now we've discovered that they may be among the most resistant species in the entire galaxy. Dr. Nalith projected her findings onto the central display. That's essentially correct, sir. Human biochemistry evolved in an environment where toxic exposure was constant and unavoidable, so their bodies developed multiple redundant systems for filtering and neutralizing harmful compounds. Their liver alone has enzyme pathways that I've never seen in any other species. Show me Earth's actual environmental classification. Thrace ordered. One of the research assistants pulled up the complete file, and the room fell silent as they read through it. Earth's atmosphere composition would be corrosive to most species. The gravity was higher than standard. The weather patterns included phenomena that would be classified as natural disasters on other worlds. And the biological diversity included thousands of species capable of killing humans through venom, poison, or physical attack. This can't be right, one instructor muttered. If Earth is this hostile, then humans shouldn't have been able to develop civilization. They should still be hiding in caves trying not to die. Yet they developed not only civilization but advanced technology, Thrace pointed out. They went from basic agriculture to faster-than-light travel in roughly 10,000 years, which is faster than most species manage. What does that tell us? Instructor Vexter, who had been present for Chris's evaluation, spoke up. It tells us that we've been judging species based on appearance and superficial observations. We saw that humans are soft-skinned and assumed they were fragile. But we failed to consider what it takes to survive on a Class 9 death world. The question now is, what do we do with this information? Thrace said while pacing around the table. We have one human trainee currently in the program, and based on preliminary reports, he's exceeded expectations in the toxin resistance evaluation. How do we adjust our training protocols to account for human capabilities? Nalith brought up comparative data on the screens. I recommend we reclassify humans from the extreme vulnerability category to the high resistance category for organic toxins. For synthetic compounds, they should be classified as moderate resistance. We should also note that their physical endurance may be higher than expected given their adaptation to high gravity and variable atmospheric conditions. What about their other capabilities? Another instructor asked. Do we know anything about human combat abilities, strategic thinking, or technological aptitude? Vexter consulted his datapad. According to the initial assessments, Chris Palmer served in Earth's military for 6 years before applying to the Academy. His records show proficiency in multiple weapon systems, leadership experience, and commendations for performance under pressure. His academic scores indicate above-average intelligence and problem-solving ability. So we have a species that's resistant to toxins, adapted to harsh conditions, and capable of strategic thinking, Thrace summarized. Why weren't we informed of this when Earth joined the Council? The research assistant who had pulled up Earth's file looked uncomfortable. The initial survey team that visited Earth spent most of their time in climate-controlled human cities where the environment was artificially regulated. They noted that humans seemed friendly and cooperative, but they didn't conduct extensive biological testing. The Class 9 Death World designation was already in the database from an earlier automated survey. But the team assumed it was an error because the humans they met didn't seem particularly hardy. Thrace's expression hardened. In other words, we made assumptions based on limited contact and didn't verify our data. This is exactly the kind of mistake that gets soldiers killed in the field. We should contact the Galactic Council and recommend a full reassessment of human capabilities, Naleth suggested. Other institutions may be making the same mistake we did. Agreed, Thrace said. But first, I want to see what else Palmer can do. Vexter, I want you to put him through the complete hazardous environment test series. Let's find out exactly what humans can handle. Over the next week, Chris found himself subjected to an increasingly intense series of evaluations that pushed the boundaries of what the Academy considered survivable. He was exposed to extreme temperatures, and his body adapted, within minutes through sweating or shivering to regulate his core temperature. He was placed in high-pressure environments, and his cardiovascular system compensated without difficulty. He was given physical endurance tests and outlasted species that were larger and more muscular. The other trainees watched these tests with growing amazement, and the mockery that had greeted Chris's arrival was replaced by cautious respect. Court approached him in the barracks one evening, and all four arms were held in a gesture that Chris had learned meant apology among Dravanians. I was wrong about you, Court said simply. I thought humans were weak because you don't look strong, but I didn't understand that strength comes in many forms. Your people survived on a world that would kill most of us within days, and that takes a different kind of strength. I appreciate that, Chris said while accepting the apology. I know I don't look like what you expect from a Death World species, but that's because humans didn't survive through being the biggest or strongest. We survived by being smart and adaptable and cooperative. Zara had become genuinely fascinated with human biology and peppered Chris with questions whenever she got the chance. Is it true that humans can eat foods that would poison other species? Some foods, yes, Chris confirmed. We eat peppers that contain capsaicin, even though it causes pain, because we've learned to enjoy the sensation. We ferment milk and grains to create new foods, even though the fermentation process involves bacteria. We consume caffeine and alcohol and other mild stimulants or depressants as part of our normal diet. That's incredible, Zara said with her ears perked forward. On my homeworld, we have very strict food safety protocols because Pelthians are sensitive to most contaminants. The idea of deliberately eating something that causes pain is completely alien to us. It's a cultural thing, Chris explained. Humans have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We actually practice a technique called Mithridatism, where we expose ourselves to small doses of toxins over time to build up immunity. Brilks's sensor stalk swiveled toward the conversation. You deliberately poison yourselves. And controlled amounts, yes, Chris said. It's an ancient practice, and while it doesn't work for every toxin, it can provide protection against some natural poisons. Some Earth leaders used to do this to protect themselves from assassination attempts. The news from the Academy's tests reached beyond the station, and within days, Chris was receiving communication requests from various military organizations throughout the galaxy. Some wanted to know if other humans shared his capabilities. Others wanted to discuss recruitment opportunities. And still others simply wanted to study human biology for scientific purposes, Instructor Vexter called Chris to his office, and the veteran soldier looked at him with an expression that might have been respect. "Palmer, I need to be honest with you. When I learned a human was joining this academy, I thought it was a mistake. I believed you would wash out within the first week, and I made no secret of that opinion." "I know, sir," Chris said calmly. "I was wrong," Vexter continued. "Not just wrong, but completely blind to what your species represents. Humans are survivors in the truest sense, and that makes you valuable soldiers. I'm recommending that Earth be contacted about sending more recruits to the Academy. With respect, sir, I think you should be careful about expectations," Chris said thoughtfully. "I'm not special among humans. Most people from Earth could do what I've done here, because we all grew up in the same environment. But that doesn't mean we're superior to other species. It just means we bring different strengths." Vexter nodded slowly. "That's a mature perspective, and it shows wisdom beyond what I expected. You're right that every species has different strengths, and the key to successful military operations is combining those strengths effectively." "Exactly," Chris agreed. "I can handle toxins better than most species, but I'm not as strong as Court. I'm not as fast as Zara, and I don't have Brooks's sensory capabilities. The Academy should focus on teaching us to work together rather than competing against each other." 3 months had passed since Chris Palmer's arrival at the Galactic Defense Academy, and the changes rippling through the institution were impossible to ignore. The training protocols had been revised to account for the varying capabilities of different species. The database entries for Earth and humans had been completely rewritten with accurate information, and requests from other academies and military organizations to study human physiology were arriving daily. Chris stood in the environmental simulation dome alongside his training unit, which now consisted of Zara, Court, Brooks, and 3 other trainees from different species who had proven themselves capable during the initial evaluations. They were suited up for a combat scenario that would test their ability to work together in a hostile environment with limited resources and active threats. Instructor Vexter's voice came through their communication systems. "Your mission is to locate and extract a simulated intelligence asset from a compound controlled by hostile forces. The environment contains multiple hazards, including toxic gas in certain sectors, extreme temperature zones, and automated defense systems. You have 2 hours to complete the objective." The simulation began, and Chris's unit moved forward with practiced coordination. Over the past 3 months, they had learned each other's strengths and developed strategies that utilized those strengths effectively. And what had started as a collection of individual trainees had become a cohesive team when they encountered the first toxic gas sector. Chris moved forward without hesitation while the others hung back. "I'll scout ahead and mark the safe path," he said while pulling a portable scanner from his equipment belt. Zara monitored the tactical display. "We're reading high concentrations of Xanther 9 and 2 other compounds in that zone. Are you sure you can handle all 3 at once? Only one way to find out." Chris replied with a slight smile that his teammates had learned meant he was confident but not reckless. He entered the toxic zone and immediately felt the familiar burning sensation that accompanied Xanther 9 exposure, but his body filtered it efficiently while he mapped the safest route through the contaminated area. The other compounds caused some irritation, but nothing that exceeded his tolerance levels. And within 10 minutes, he had marked a path that the rest of the team could follow with minimal protective gear. "That's our human doing what he does best," Cord said with obvious pride in his voice. Over the months, the Dravenian had become one of Chris's strongest supporters and frequently defended humans when other trainees questioned their capabilities. The team moved through the marked path and reached the compound perimeter where automated defense systems immediately activated. This was where Brooks's sensor capabilities became crucial, as the multi-stalked alien could detect defense grid patterns and predict safe approach vectors. "Follow my lead and stay within 2 meters of my position," Brooks directed while navigating through the invisible sensor fields. They reached the compound entrance, where an extreme temperature zone protected the doorway. The temperature differential was severe enough that most species would suffer thermal shock just from attempting to cross the threshold. But Cord's Dravenian physiology included natural thermal regulation that made him ideal for this challenge. "I'll open the door from inside," Cord said while charging through the temperature barrier. His armored skin showed some stress from the exposure, but he accomplished the task and the door slid open to admit the rest of the team inside the compound. They found the simulated intelligence asset along with several automated combat drones that activated the moment they entered. This was where Zara's speed and agility became essential as she moved between cover positions while drawing the drone's fire. And Chris used the distraction to disable them with precise shots from his training weapon. Asset secured. One of the other team members reported while helping the simulation actor to their feet. "We need to get back to the extraction point in 45 minutes. The return journey tested their endurance and problem-solving abilities as the simulation threw new challenges at them. A collapsed tunnel forced them to find an alternate route. An unexpected chemical spill required Chris to identify safe passage through contaminated water. And a simulated injury to one team member meant they had to coordinate carrying that person while maintaining defensive positions. They reached the extraction point with 7 minutes to spare, and Vexter's voice came through their communications again. "Mission complete. Well executed, all of you. Report to the briefing room for evaluation." In the briefing room, Vexter reviewed their performance with detailed analysis of their decisions and teamwork. "You utilized each member's strengths appropriately and compensated for individual weaknesses through cooperation. Palmer, your ability to navigate toxic environments gave the team access to routes that would have been impassable for most units. Cord, your thermal resistance allowed you to accomplish tasks that would have required specialized equipment. Brooks, your sensor capabilities prevented multiple casualties from hidden defenses. Zara, your speed and agility created tactical opportunities that the team exploited effectively." The instructor paused and looked at each of them. "This is what the Academy is designed to teach. Not that one species is superior to another, but that diverse capabilities combined through teamwork create units that are stronger than any individual could be alone." After the briefing, Chris returned to his barracks and found a message waiting from Commandant General Thrace, requesting his presence in the command center. When he arrived, he found not only Thrace, but several high-ranking officers from different galactic military organizations, along with representatives from the Galactic Council. "Palmer, thank you for joining us," Thrace said formally. "These officers have been reviewing the data from your training evaluations, and they have some questions about human capabilities." One of the council representatives, a tall being with crystalline features, spoke first. "We've received reports that suggest humans possess significant resistance to toxic substances and harsh environments. Is this capability common among your species, or are you an exceptional individual?" Chris considered his answer carefully. "I'm not exceptional by human standards, ma'am. Most people from Earth could match or exceed my performance in the areas we've tested. We all grew up in the same environment and developed the same basic adaptations. The officers exchanged glances, and another spoke up. If that's accurate, then Earth represents a significant untapped resource for military recruitment. We're facing increasing threats from hostile factions who use chemical and biological weapons. And having soldiers who can operate in those conditions without extensive protective equipment would be a major advantage. I understand your interest, Chris said carefully. But I want to make something clear. Humans didn't evolve to be soldiers, and we're not naturally aggressive. We survived on Earth by learning to cooperate and work together. And that's the capability you should value most. Yes, we can handle toxins and harsh conditions, but our real strength is our ability to adapt and find solutions to problems. Thrace nodded approvingly. Well said. The Academy isn't looking to create weapons. We're looking to create defenders. Palmer has shown us that humans can excel in that role. Over the following weeks, news of the human trainee who laughed at poison spread throughout the galactic community. Some species were impressed, others were skeptical, and a few were concerned about what other surprises Earth might hold. But the overall impact was clear. Humanity's reputation was changing from newcomers who barely met the technology requirements to survivors from a death world with unexpected capabilities. Chris received letters from home and learned that Earth's government had been contacted about sending more recruits to the Academy. His younger brother had apparently applied immediately upon hearing the news. And several of Chris's former military colleagues were also considering the opportunity. Sarah found him reading these messages in the common area one evening. You must be proud. Your entire species is being recognized for their potential. I'm more relieved than proud, Chris admitted. When I came here, I was worried that I would confirm everyone's worst assumptions about humans. Instead, I got to show them that we're capable and reliable, and that's all I really wanted. You showed them much more than that, Zara said while sitting beside him. You showed them that assumptions based on appearance are dangerous. You showed them that survival takes many forms. And you showed them that even species from harsh worlds can be gentle and cooperative. Chris smiled at that. Those are nice words, but I'm just one person. The real test will be whether humans can maintain that reputation as more of us join the galactic community. I think you will, Zara said confidently. Because you're right that your real strength isn't your toxin resistance or your endurance. Your real strength is that you understand cooperation and you value working with others. That's what the galaxy needs. The final evaluation before graduation involved a comprehensive test of everything the trainees have learned over 6 months. Chris's unit performed exceptionally well and earned commendations from the instructing staff. And when the graduation ceremony arrived, the auditorium was filled with representatives from military organizations across the galaxy.